These bombers were developed in the 1930s during the Great Depression, when the US Army Air Corps, despite their low budget, tried to modernize its fleet to keep up with the fast evolution of the aircraft industry. Though initially the type came out as a winner against the B-17 design in a 1935 competition, they mostly became obsolete by the time the US entered the war. Still, they were amongst the first American planes to sink German U-boats. These were the Douglas B-18 bombers. So let's see the history of these planes today. During the 1930s, the US Army Air Corps had to go through serious modernization to keep up with other militaries around the globe, as the new developments in aircraft design brought so many changes through this decade. Even though the economic situation and the low peacetime budget severely restricted new developments, still many new designs were developed and introduced to Army service during this time period. The Keystone biplane bombers were just delivered to the Army in 1932. But in 1934, they were already surpassed by the new Martin B-10 model, which featured all the modern technologies the aircraft industry had to offer. The B-10 revolutionized the way bombers were designed in the US, as it was the first all-metal monoplane bomber of the Army Air Corps, with an enclosed cockpit, retractable landing gear, and many other cutting-edge features. But the advances in aircraft design didn't stop, and as soon as these new modern bombers entered service, the Army already issued new specifications for their replacement in August 1934. The new requirements asked for about 2,000 pounds of bomb load, twice the amount the B-10 could carry, at least 200 miles an hour top speed, but preferably closer to 250 miles an hour, and a minimum range of 1,020 miles. Again, 2,000 miles was desired but not required. 3 designs were considered in the tender: the Boeing Model 299, which later became the B-17 bomber, the Douglas DB-1, which became the B-18, and the Martin 146. None of the proposals were designed from scratch, as the Army only allowed 1 year for the manufacturers to enter their designs. The Boeing 299 combined numerous features from their earlier XP-15 experimental bomber and the 247 transport plane. The Douglas DB-1 was a modification of the company's DC-2 passenger aircraft, with longer wings, modified nose, tail, and fuselage. And finally, the Martin 146 was just a modification of the earlier B-10 design, with a wider fuselage, stronger engines, and other modifications. The Douglas prototype was completed in April 1935, and it showed good performance during its first flights. It had a service ceiling of 24,500 feet and a range of 1,050 miles with 2,000 pounds of bomb load. And it could reach a top speed of 235 miles an hour. Soon it was delivered to Wright Field to participate in a fly-off between the 3 designs, which started on 28th of July 1935. After the first comparison flights, the Martin design turned out to be the worst of the 3 aircraft, and the 4-engine Boeing design easily outperformed its rivals, and seemed like it will be the winner of the competition, so much so that the Air Corps considered ordering 65 units of the type even before the competition ended. But the events took another turn at the end of October, when the Boeing bomber crashed, and since it couldn't finish the trials, it was disqualified. As a result, the Douglas DB-1 was declared as a winner and received the Army designation B-18. Though the Army Air Corps was still impressed with the Boeing design, its price was almost double of the Douglas B-18's, so the planned order of 65 Boeing planes was changed to 133 of the B-18 model, and the manufacturing contract was awarded to Douglas in January 1936. Apart from the price, the general view about bombers at the time also played a big part in the outcome. In the mid-1930s, many thought that for supporting the army forces, more medium bombers were better than less from the heavy 4-engine ones. The 2 other companies still received some consolation prizes. Martin received a contract for a last batch of B-10 bombers, while Boeing was awarded a contract for 13 YB-17 models, based on the strong performance of the type in the trials. If you're interested in the history of the B-17 bombers and how, regardless of this early failure, they entered service, check out my earlier video covering the type. After the initial order of 133 B-18 bombers, Additional 177 were ordered in 1937, and another 40 units in 1938. The first production models of the Douglas bomber were delivered in February 1937. But after the modifications to the production variant and receiving the defensive armament, the performance of the new bombers dropped significantly. The top speed was reduced to 216 miles an hour, and the range to 850 miles with 2,000 pounds of bomb load. During the production, the type received several changes and updates. So let's take a look at the variants of the B-18. The DB-1 was the initial prototype, featuring two Wright R1820 engines, developing 850 horsepower each. The first production variants were the B-18 models, which featured a shorter nose with modified glazing, slightly stronger engines now producing 930 horsepower, and a defensive armament of 3 30-caliber machine guns, one in the nose, one in the rear ventral position, and one in a retractable turret at the top of the fuselage. The last aircraft from this series was designated DB-2, and it was tested with a power turret in the nose, but this modification was not approved in the end. 133 units were produced, from which 22 were built as B-18M trainer variants. After the initial production run, the revised B-18A models were introduced. These featured a redesigned nose to allow more space for the bombardier and the nose gunner. They also introduced new, more powerful Wright R1820 53 engines, delivering 1,000 horsepower each. These models started to arrive to the Army in June 1938, and 217 units were built, 2 of them without armament as transport planes under the designation C-58, and another 19 were built as B-18AM trainer variants. In 1939, the original DB-1 prototype was modified to carry a 75mm cannon on board. Its nose was shortened and the gun was installed in the bomb bay. Ground firing and airborne tests followed with the modified plane, but it was found the gun's recoil was too strong for the airframe. Though this variant was quickly abandoned, the data collected proved very useful when a similar weapon was installed later in the B-25 bombers. The Canadian Air Force also purchased 20 of these aircraft in 1939, which wholly differed from the originals in their radio equipment and weaponry. They entered Canadian service as Digby-1. After the US entered the war, 122 of the B-18A models were converted to B-18B variants for anti-submarine warfare. The modifications included the removal of the characteristic shark nose and the installation of an air-to-surface radar in place of it. The bombardier position was moved below the radar, and the tail was also modified to house a magnetic anomaly detector device. The B-18 was 57 feet 10 inches long, with a wingspan of 89 feet 6 inches. It had an empty weight of 16,320 pounds and a maximum takeoff weight of 27,673 pounds. The bomber was powered by 2 Wright R1820 engines, each of them producing 1,000 horsepower. It could reach a top speed of 216 miles an hour and a cruise speed of 176 miles an hour. The plane's combat range was 900 miles, and it had a service ceiling of 23,900 feet. Its defensive armament consisted of 3 30-caliber machine guns, and it could carry a normal bomb load of 2,000 pounds and a maximum load of 4,400 pounds for short ranges. The first production B-18s were delivered to the Army in 1937, and by 1940 they were the most numerous Army Air Corps bomber in service outside the US. But as new developments were introduced in the aviation industry, the type quickly started to show its age. By 1940, the B-18 was a 5-year-old design, and many new aircraft appeared showing much better performance, like the Japanese Mitsubishi G3M bomber, which was faster, had bigger range, and higher service ceiling. I have already made videos about the G3M bomber and its successor, the G4M, so if you're interested in the history of the Japanese World War II bombers, check them out. The B-18s first saw combat when the Japanese forces attacked Pearl Harbor in December 1941, though this combat debut was not very successful, as most of these bombers stationed at Hawaii and on the Philippines were destroyed on the ground. Though being obsolete, the B-18 stayed in service in a defensive role until new, more advanced designs became available, like the returning B-17 and the B-24 Liberator. These new types started to replace the B-18s from 1942, and in the same year, 122 of the older bombers were modified for anti-submarine role and redesignated B-18B models. They were mostly used around the Caribbean, flying anti-submarine patrols. And during one of these flights, on 2nd of October 1942, one of them managed to sink the German U-boat U-512. One of the Canadian variants also managed to score a kill on a German submarine in the same month, sinking U-520. But even in this role, the type didn't last long, as only a year later they were replaced by the B-24s, which with their longer range were much more useful protecting Allied shipping in the Atlantic than the short-range B-18s. The B-18, which started its life in 1935 as a modern bomber, spent the second half of the war in training and cargo transport role. But it gave Douglas valuable experience they used to design their later planes like the A-20 Havoc or the A-26 Invader. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please leave a like, subscribe to my channel, and in the comments let me know if there's any interesting events or vehicles you'd like to see.